You're listening to Patrick Christie's here at Love Sport Radio, and this is the section of the show that the show is named after, PC Gone Mad, and we have not disappointed with this one, okay? A young mother is barred from a local pub for wearing a T-shirt saying women, human, female on the front of it, after a complaint that it discriminated against transgender people. I am joined on the line now by Rebekah Wershbale. Rebekah, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
No, thank you for coming on. Right, okay, look, just tell me what happened.
It's essentially as reported in the paper. I know it seems like there should be more of a story behind it, but that is it. I was in a pub that I go to very frequently with my girlfriend, with my best friend, playing a board game, upset a man there by asking him how he was, and was asked to leave unceremoniously.
So they asked you to leave, I understand it, because of what was written on your shirt, is that right?
Yes, that was named specifically as one of the things that had upset people.
Okay, and what was on the shirt was woman, human, female, is that right?
It was literally the Oxford English Dictionary definition of woman, adult, human, female.
Okay, and were there any transgender people in this particular pub? Who was offended by this?
Well, it's been covered in the papers. A gay man who I do know, but only from working. He works in another pub, and for whatever reason, he's got a lot of sort of bad feeling towards me about the campaigns that I've been involved in recently in my feminist politics, and yeah, he took offence. Okay,
so I mean, you could see maybe how people of transgender persuasion could be offended by that, because they would presumably disagree with that definition of what that is to be a woman. So it begs the question, why wear something to be deliberately provocative or that could cause offence?
Well, because I don't believe that capitulating to a delusion is ultimately going to benefit anybody. And I believe that it's very important to be able to define oneself with biological pretexts. And I think that's very, very important now that we are seeing a little bit of a movement that is kind of sidelining women and removing women from like public discourse and from, well, there are many, many, many examples where women need to be in sex segregated spaces. And I think that it's very, very important to keep drawing attention to this issue. And I think that the T-shirt is an excellent talking point, because people can't really understand why it's a problem. And to be honest, they're right.
So you said at the start there, a delusion. In your opinion, what is that delusion? I just want to understand where it is you're coming from with this.
Well, because if somebody says they're transgender, they can make all sorts of cosmetic changes to their body, they can socially transition. It does not change their biology. It doesn't stop them being the sex they were born as. And I think that a move to accept transgenderism rather than have people insist that to be accepted as the sex that they aren't, I think that will be a lot more progressive and beneficial.
Do you not think, though, that most right-thinking people would regard somebody who classes themselves as being a woman, or vice versa, obviously, a man, as being what they regard themselves as being, if that makes sense? So what is so troubling about somebody who is transgender just deciding that they do want to be classed as a woman? They view themselves as a woman. Why is that in any way, shape or form a detriment to you personally?
Well, it's a detriment to women who are vulnerable in society. So we're looking at things like women in prison specifically, women in refuges, women who need spaces away from male-bodied people. Regardless of how they identify, a lot of these women are going to feel threatened, they're going to feel triggered by male-bodied people in their spaces. We've had the horrible example of Karen White recently, a man saying that he's transgender, was moved to a women's prison where the first week he was there, he sexually assaulted 4 women. I mean, he's been rightly moved back to the male estate now, but he's certainly not an isolated case. There are a lot of transgender prisoners who are appealing to be moved to female prison. Ian Huntley, again, is an example. So this is where our concern lies, not with transgender people per se, but people abusing a law called sex self-ID that will allow them to, identify themselves, legally in law as women and be afforded all of the all the privileges that come with that, if you can call refuge access a privilege.
Is there not a certain irony here that you are obviously campaigning a campaigner for women's rights, for civil rights for women, but at the same time, it does appear that you're maybe trying to block the civil rights of another demographic of society.
What rights would you say I'm trying to block?
Or their right to define themselves however they wish.
They can define themselves however they wish, but they still must pay heed to their biology and the conditioning and socialization that they've received as males.
What gives you the right to dictate that? Because they would argue that they would take the opposite view, obviously. And so what qualifies you to have the correct opinion when theirs is wrong?
I'm not saying it's a correct opinion. My concern is with the protection, the elevation and liberation of women. And I do not feel that while we're having to pretend that we're okay with something that most women are not actually comfortable with, I don't see how that is a wrong opinion when...
Do you think most women aren't comfortable with transgender women? Is that a fact?
I would say from the campaigns that we've run, and we've spoken to an awful lot of people all across the country, and we've had an awful lot of people visit our website, message us directly, and on a personal level as well, most of the women that I've spoken to are very, very alarmed at the idea of their daughters having to share changing space with young males. They're very, very alarmed at the Girl Guide situation, in which like young boys, sort of teenage boys, people incapable of insemination are sharing dormitory space and tent space with young girls, people capable of impregnation. They're very, very concerned at the safeguarding aspect behind all of this. And so, yes, I would say that public opinion is for keeping sex-segregated spaces sex-segregated.
I mean, I just at the bottom of one of the articles that's been written about this, actually, I thought there was quite an interesting line here that says, you are quoted as saying, I thought if she, I think that's the person that asked you to leave the pub, the bar woman, thought it was troubling that I was being removed from my own local because I was wearing a feminist T-shirt that had upset a gay man. Is there some issue around that with you? Essentially, this is, I suppose, the opposite of feminism, isn't it? That a man can take offence at a feminist T-shirt and remove you from a pub.
Well, that is certainly a very troubling aspect, as I raised at the time, that my opinion was essentially being quelled by that of another person. Male or female, it doesn't really matter, although it is very telling that it was a man who gave the order, essentially, to have me barred.
Do you think that ultimately we live in quite a fast-paced, changing world, and some of these issues regarding transgenderism simply didn't exist on this scale anyway a number of years ago, and actually I'm just trying to get to the bottom of whether or not your issue seems to be with transgenderism or with the fact that we haven't caught up with the safety or perceived safety elements of it yet?
My concern is that the definition of transgender has changed very, very dramatically over the past, I'm going to say maybe like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
So Stonewall have introduced new guidelines saying, you don't necessarily have to have a diagnosis of dysphoria. You don't have to have started, hormone treatment. So they're accepting anybody who says that they're non-binary, cross-dressers, trans-femme, trans-masculine. All of these labels now can mean trans. So, of course, we're seeing a huge sort of surge in the transgender population, which if self-ID is going to come in, women's facilities don't have the wherewithal and they wouldn't be able to deal with an influx like that. So it's troubling to me as well that it all seems to be very much based on stereotypes, where now, we have a situation where a girl can't like trucks or a boy can't like ballet stuff because it will set trans alarm bells jingling, when in reality, like, kids just need to be kids.
Yeah, I understand that. With regard to, because this is something that a lot of feminists speak out about, this exact issue, is there a part of it that is that women essentially don't like the idea that men can identify as women? Do you feel that there is something being removed from your womanhood there?
Yes, absolutely. It reduces womanhood to a costume, to a feeling in a man's head.
Right, okay. All right, well, look, thank you very much. I thought it was quite informative, actually. It's Rebekah Wershbale there, a young mother who was barred from a local pub for wearing a T-shirt saying woman, human, female on the front of it. Certainly an interesting topic. Right, now stay tuned. Much more from me. Patrick Christie's here at Love Sport after the break.